This video will provide a brief walkthrough of the process of setting up an ODBC connection in Status Enterprise. On my screen here you'll see a simple database I created in Microsoft Access. If I open this table, you'll see I've created two values, one for weight and one for volume. This is obviously a very simple database for the purpose of the demonstration, but any ODBC data source will work. The first thing I need to do is create the ODBC source in Windows. I have to access my administrative tools in the control panel, and in the administrative tools I'll select Data Sources ODBC, and I'll select the System DSN tab to make sure that this data source is available to all users on this machine. And I select Add and select the Microsoft Access driver. Since this is an Access database I'm using, you'll just want to be sure that you select the appropriate driver for whatever kind of data source you're using. And then I give my data source a name and click Select. Navigate to where my database is stored on my machine, select it, and click OK. Now my database is added as an ODBC data source. Next I just need to open the Status Enterprise Data Connector. Here I'm accessing it from the Data Model Designer. I select New to create a new mapping configuration, give it a name. Then in the Data Provider panel I'll select my provider type, in this case ODBC provider. Under Server Information I'll see the name of the data source that I just created and select it. And then I have to create a query. When I click Query Builder, a dialog will open listing all of the tables available in my database. In this case there's just the one. I'll double click the table name, then I can click the Test button to test the connection, and I get a preview of the values available in that table. It looks good, so I'll click OK, and then click Update Queries to save the information. Now if my database had several tables I wanted to reference, I could create additional queries here by clicking the Add button, but in this case I just have the one. The next step is to click Connect in the Data Mapping panel, then Configure Mappings. In the Mapping Configuration window I'll see a document tree listing the assets in my data model on the left, and on the right a list of the available data sources. I just select the properties in my data model that I want to update, select the appropriate data from my provider, and click Add Mapping. You'll see the mapping added to the list beneath. I'll add one more for the other value I want to update. And then I close this window and click Save to save my mapping configuration, and that's it. Now my data model is retrieving information from the database I created. To demonstrate, I'll just open the Status Enterprise Mimic Designer, where I have this simple mimic started with a couple of controls from the toolbox. I'll bind these controls to the appropriate properties in my data model. And then when I run the mimic, I'll see the values on these controls updated to reflect the current values in my database. If these values change in the database, the values will update in my data model and will also update in these controls. And that is how you configure an ODBC data source in Status Enterprise.